On this episode of Music from Humans, we're diving into the world of Stephen Lias, an adventurer composer whose music captures the awe-inspiring beauty of nature, from the rugged peaks of Denali to the depths of Carlsbad Caverns. Stephen's compositions bring the majesty of the wilderness into concert halls around the world. As a professor at the Stephen F. Austin State University in Texas, Stephen has had his music performed by some of the world's finest ensembles, including the Boulder Philharmonic, the Russian String Orchestra, and the Anchorage Symphony. His compositions are sonic landscapes that transport listeners to the breathtaking vistas of America's national parks. In today's interview, we'll explore not only the creative process behind Stephen's stunning compositions, but also the business side of bringing these works to life. How do you protect your artistic vision while navigating the logistics of contracts, payments, and deadlines? We'll uncover how a well-crafted contract serves as the foundation for creative freedom, ensuring the music thrives long after its premiere. Stay tuned and explore the incredible world of music from humans like Stephen Lias. Hello, Stephen. Glad you could come on Music from Humans and talk with us for a bit.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I haven't quite really met you. You came in as a recommendation through a friend of mine who met you through one of your programs that you've created called Composing in the Wilderness.
Right.
Through that and some research, I've noticed we actually do have a few things in common that I thought were kind of interesting. One of your works was premiered by the East Texas Symphony.
Oh, right. Glacier Bay. Mm-hmm.
Glacier Bay, right. And I, in the early 90s, used to play in that symphony.
Did you?
Yep. I used to travel out to Tyler and play contrabassoon with them.
How interesting. We would have been in Tyler probably at the same time then.
The other thing I discovered is I have a love of camping in national parks, and obviously you do as well, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But one of the things is you wrote a piece that was inspired by Big Bend, and again in the early 90s, I wrote a piece that was inspired by Big Bend.
Really? That's great.
Yeah, so kind of interesting. No matter where you are in the world, there's always some similarities.
Of course, it's a small world, especially this world of contemporary music. It seems like everywhere you go, you're bumping into someone who's only 1 degree of separation away from you.
Yeah, and which is definitely going to benefits my channel as I get people to, hey, who's the next guy I should talk to? And,
right, of
and
course.
Things like that. So one of the things I'd love to chat with you about is you seem to get all these commissions and have this great set of works that you've written for the national parks. And as a national park lover and camping natural state person, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I've listened to a few of them. I really enjoyed Mount Rainier Search and Rescue. So I'm a sucker for the multiphonic, so I enjoyed that one a lot.
Good. Yeah, so you just want like a summary of how I got into that and how it's gone?
Yeah. If you have a favorite piece out of those works or one that was near and dear to you.
Well, yeah, so a little bit about the whole trajectory. Back in around 2009, I was applying for a grant that required a project proposal, and I thought to myself and kind of came up on the spot with the idea of combining my outdoor interests with my composing interests and sort of being a composer who focused on national parks. I hadn't done it up until then. And even though that grant wasn't funded, having then thought of that idea, I had to pursue it anyway. And so I took opportunities as they presented themselves. And as you say, the very first opportunity that presented itself was a kayaking trip through Santa Elena Canyon at Big Bend National Park with a trombonist friend of mine. And so I was able to write a three-movement trombone sonata called River Runner for her. And that led to a trombone choir piece about Sequoia, and then a trumpet ensemble piece about Kings Canyon, and then a trumpet sonata about Rocky Mountain National Park, all within just the first year and a half or two of when I started this. And that was when I discovered that many of the national parks had artist-in-residence programs. And that was something that I hadn't been aware of, but many national parks run a program where they invite artists of any sort to come into their park and be inspired and capture the essence of that place in whatever art they make. And so at that time, I was one of the only composers many of those programs had ever seen. And so I was very fortunate that I got selected at Rocky Mountain and Glacier and Denali, a number of really wonderful artist in residence programs. So those resulted in pieces, sometimes pieces that I would shop to other ensembles and say, hey, I'm writing a piece, would you guys premiere it? And then other times a commission would come along and I would ask, hey, is it okay if I write a piece about a national park? And so it would progress that direction. But through one or the other of those avenues, it snowballed and grew until the commissions were bigger, the projects were bigger, started writing symphonic pieces like Glacier Bay, the piece that the East Texas Symphony played, and then a subsequent piece about Rocky Mountain, a piece about Glacier that were orchestral works. And it's still going on. I'm still working on those. I'm working on one right now for Great Sand Dunes National Park. And then after that, the next one will be a Mount Rainier piece for symphony orchestra and projected imagery. So it's been maybe a little over a dozen years that whole trajectory has sort of occupied maybe 80% of my composing activity.
Wow, that's awesome. And you mentioned that you have the projected imagery. Now, from what I gleaned, and you can adjust my sentences, that you have a lot of imagery that can go with some of your pieces. They're not required, but that many of your pieces actually do have a visual element option to.
Right. Well, there are a couple facets to this. Number one, just practically, as I think many composers know, orchestras, professional orchestras, are increasingly programming content that has visual material. The whole phenomenon of go to see a famous movie with live orchestra playing, that's a sort of an audience-building activity that many orchestras are doing. But they're also doing other sorts of things, new scores for silent films, and taking traditional works that have not had visual material and commissioning a video artist to create visual material for it. So that was something that's happening more and more often. And as a composer who's writing a piece about a place, it sometimes makes perfect sense that it would be conceived that way. Some of my pieces were conceived from the ground up as pieces with imagery. The Gates of the Arctic piece. And now, especially this next Mount Rainier piece will have imagery with it. So I conceive of what the sequences of images or movies will be, and then I align that with the movie or the music that I'll be writing. That, it's not like a movie score, and it's not like images accompanying the music. It's like the two are married together. Now, some of my other pieces I've added imagery to afterwards at the request of an orchestra. Glacier Bay has been performed both with and without imagery. Some audiences are looking for that. Sometimes they have another piece on the program that will have projection, and so it depends on the situation. So I don't do it on all of my pieces. I'm not doing it right now on the Great Sand Dunes piece, but I kind of take each project on its own terms in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm actually, since, again, back in the early 90s, I was always a very large proponent of multimedia presentations of orchestra works.
Right.
And I know my senior recital had pieces on there, had multiple elements that also had slideshows to go with them. And I think that's a great way to go.
Yeah, different audiences feel differently about it. And I've had people come up to me afterwards and said, I found the imagery so interesting that I discovered I wasn't listening to the music, so I shut my eyes. And that's fine. Like everyone can choose their own path with those pieces.
Yeah. Your ability to have them with or without.
Right.
I've always thought that, modern audiences need more stimulus at times, and to be able to use visual references like that, I think helps them. So how many of these national park pieces have you written so far? Is it
I don't have a solid number. It's in the 24 or slightly more vicinity, ranging from pieces that I just wrote about a place that resonated with me and where there was no formal relationship. It was just a person writing a piece about a place. And then other, spanning all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it was a result of an agreement between me and the park, sometimes through an artist in residence program, sometimes just through an independent one-off agreement. And they've also ranged really widely in terms of style and genre and instrumentation, and level of difficulty. I'll give you two examples that are quite extreme. When the Boulder Philharmonic commissioned me for a centennial piece for Rocky Mountain National Park, I was able to write a really, quite challenging professional orchestra piece for them that got then subsequently played at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., a real pinnacle moment, high-level music and a high-level location. In that same year, I wrote a piece for the high school choir and band in Nome, Alaska, which is an incredibly remote place and with limited resources, limited instruments, and so the challenges of those of each of those sort of peculiar situations is really rewarding. Seeing where each project will lead and seeing how it comes to fruition.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's a big key, I guess, to any commission or project is to be writing for that ensemble.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's an important factor.
Yeah, and there are times where I've worked with some composers, they're just writing a piece and it's like crazy difficult. So this is going to take even a professional group a year plus to learn.
Right.
You're making it difficult to get this performed at this stage in your career without having somebody lined up, willing to take on something of that level of difficulty. So I think it's a really important lesson to have an ensemble in mind, or at least an ensemble level in mind.
Right.
The broader of a group that you have to choose from, meaning you've written it at a level that, there's a large amount of group. Maybe you're still writing an orchestra piece, but a lot of community orchestras at a level where a community orchestra play it, then you're going to have a greater chance of finding someone to be able to perform.
Right. Yeah, I really emphasize that with my students. It is valuable to try to write virtuosically, to know that you can. But if you want to consider the life of the piece, if you write a virtuosic piece that only 1% of the clarinetists in the world can play, it will get a premiere. If you have someone you're writing it for, they'll premiere it, and that's great. But if you want that piece to land on its feet and have a life beyond the premiere, often you have to be thinking about where the market is. And a clarinet piece, like every university has clarinet majors who have to do senior and junior recitals. And so if you write a piece that a college senior can play, suddenly you're opening up an incredibly broad market that you're not really getting at if you just write for that top sliver of the professional players.
Such sound advice. I forgot to mention too, like you are a composition professor at Stephen F. Austin, Nacogdoches, Texas.
Yep.
Which is a great university out there.
Starting my 25th year here.
Wow, that is quite a
long time.
Quite an adventure. I think some of the advice you've given sort of leads us to a question I have about. You mentioned some of these works are parts of commissions,
right?
So how did some of that come about for this? What are some of the things that you could impart on getting commissions and how all that works?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. It's something that not a lot of people talk enough about, and so often it feels like it's behind a curtain for emerging composers who maybe haven't had a lot of commissions and are trying to figure out how to do it. The commissions generally fall into a number of different sort of paradigms. A traditional, very simple, straightforward commission might be, for example, I just recently finished a solo piano piece, a short, showy piece, kind of an encore piece for a pianist. If you have a performer that's interested in you writing them a piece, and you say, well, let's make it a commission, then obviously step one is decide what can they afford. And so sometimes that can feel very awkward if you haven't done that sort of negotiation before. But ultimately, if they were asking you to babysit or mow their lawn, there would be a fee involved. And we just have to get over that hump. And then if they can't afford anything, you may decide not to do the project, or you may decide to do it anyway. But if they can afford something, then you probably will find a middle ground that's a price that you can work with. And from there, I recommend that everybody have a contract. Do more than just an email exchange or a handshake. Have a contract and make sure that it includes all of the things that would protect both parties. What's the price? Will it be paid up front, or will it be paid on delivery, or will it be half up front, half on delivery? What is the delivery date? When do they need it? Does the commissioner get a period of exclusivity? This is something people often forget to talk about. So, for example, the pianist that I just wrote that piece for wants to be the only pianist to have that piece for a year. And so often a commission contract will include a little bullet point about that the composer won't make the piece widely available through publication or other means until X number of months or years or days has passed. What happens if the composer doesn't complete it, either because they got sick or because they just weren't good with deadlines? What's in there to protect the commissioner, to make sure that they get the product that they wanted? So another thing that you can include in a contract is whether there's an exclusivity period where the performer would be the exclusive holder of that piece for a certain amount of time. This is something that's often overlooked, but can be quite valuable to a performer. They may be commissioning the piece in order to premiere it at a specific, the International Flute Association or the International Trumpet Guild or something. And they'll want to make sure they're the only performer who's got access to that piece. And so often a contract will include some sort of exclusivity clause. You also want to include what happens if the composer doesn't finish the piece. That can be an important way to protect the commissioner. Do they get their money back if they paid any money? What if it's just a little bit late? Those sorts of things. So your agreement will generally include all of those things. If you're just doing this for the first time, you want to make sure that the contract says explicitly that this is not a work for hire. That's a really important legal matter, because anything that you write as work for hire means that the commissioner owns it. That's the kind of paradigm where you're writing music for a TV commercial, for example, where the people who paid for the commercial own that music, and you're not going to get residuals or have any follow-up income stream from that. And so when we do commissions generally as concert and stage, chamber music composers, we do not want them to be works for hire, because after the commission is complete, we want to be able to sell the work, publish the work, and make it part of our catalog that's available and have a revenue stream from it. So often make sure that you want to include the phrase, this is not a work for hire. And if you would like, you can follow that up with composer retains all intellectual property rights associated with the piece, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very simple formula. And then another paradigm would be if you're doing it as a consortium commission. A consortium commission, these are becoming more and more common, and they simply mean that the composer will set a fee. You want to write, maybe you're being commissioned to write a band piece. and 5 different bands are all going to chip in $1,000 each to create a pot of money of $5,000 that then goes to the composer. And that's good for everyone. Each part of each participant in the commission doesn't have to pay as much because you can split the money up among more groups. And from the composer's side, you get the same amount of money for the work, but you get 5 premieres. You're like guaranteed that all of the people that are on the consortium are going to want to participate in premiering it as well. And so you get more performances, and you spread the money out among a number of people. So that's, other than the fact that it's multiple people, and often there's a longer exclusivity period for those kinds of things, the contract would be very similar to what you would do just for a single commissioner. And then I will say that crowdfunding is causing there to sort of be a new facet to how commissions are often done. And you may see consortium commissions that are done as public crowdfunding calls. I've seen 2 of these in the last 3 days on social media where someone is going to do a consortium commission with maybe a composer that has a little bit of notoriety, some kind of reputation, and they put out a public call saying, hey, all saxophonists out there, I'm going to be doing a consortium commission with fill in famous composer name here. If you want to be part of the consortium, it's $50 a participant, and here's the link where you can join up. And so we're seeing more and more of those sorts of hybrids between crowdfunding and consortium commission, and that can work out really well for everyone as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've seen that. I know a lot of my composer friends have a piece they really want to do and might do crowdfunding themselves, but I haven't quite seen the consortium, and that's really big in the orchestra world too.
Yep.
I love going to new operas, and it's very, very common in the operas because how expensive they are to put on.
Yeah, operas, consortiums are very, very common in that respect. When you're talking to emerging composers, probably the biggest question they have is, how do I know how much to charge for a commission? And I'll address that very briefly too, because I've dealt with this so often, both with myself and with my students. Former students, they get out there in the world, they get a commission, they're just not sure what to charge for it. And so I've created, and you at home can create this too, using Microsoft Excel. I've created a little Excel formula. And I'm happy to share mine with anyone who wants it, but you can also create one of your own. And mine uses a number of variables. It uses how long is the piece, how many staves are on the score, and how many parts are there, and then how famous is the composer. So those are all a little bit wobbly. But the reason I say how many parts are there is a different thing than how many staves are there on the score is because, for example, if you have, 8-part choir and piano, there are no parts, but there are 10 staves on the score. And if we assume that a 2-stave instrument is slightly more complicated to write for than a 1-staff instrument, then, you could argue that you make your Excel sheet do whatever you want. But I use those bits of information, and then I figure, okay, someone who's a student composer might get $200 for this 5-minute work for woodwind quintet, whereas someone who's maybe a graduate student or a recent graduate might get, $600, whereas someone who's established and, sort of a professional now, but maybe not world famous, might get $1,200. And, I just putz with the numbers until they start to feel right to me. And so nowadays, when I have a commissioner approach me, I often literally will just send them my little spreadsheet results. I'll say, well, here's what my starting point says. We can use that as a point to negotiate up or down, obviously. But that gives me a rough number to start with based on sort of all of those factors. And then you can balance that. If somebody wants it really fast, that's going to be more expensive. If somebody wants it and they don't need it fast and they're going to premiere it at a major national conference, where, you know, for example, if you write a flute piece, it's going to get premiered at the National Flute Association. You know, thousands of flute players will hear it and maybe rush out and buy it. So you may decide to lower your fee for someone in that situation. So there are always variable factors that you're weighing for and against. And in general, the first question you ask yourself is, do I want to write the piece? And if you want to write the piece, then find a number that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
another that works.
Yeah, and if you're not sure you want to write the piece, then make sure, I'm not saying you should highball someone to scare them off, but make sure that if you're looking at the prospect of writing a piece that you're not thrilled about writing or that you're nervous about writing, that you're not going to also add insult to injury by writing it for very little. Be willing to say no to a commission that you feel like doesn't pay enough or doesn't have enough positive side to it.
When you're in the negotiations on this, do you present a number first, or do you ask them if they have a range in mind?
I would say 80% of the time, the way the conversation with me goes is that someone will express interest in commissioning me, and I will say, we will have an initial conversation where I find out how long do you want the work, you know, what is the ensemble, do you have any special parameters that we need to work within, and then I'll give them a ballpark number. Usually. Now, there are certainly other situations where someone will come to me and say, we've got a budget of X. Would that be enough to get us a commission? And in that case, I can work with them as well. So it can work either direction. And then another facet that I haven't brought up yet is most composers are doing this on their own, which is necessary, but also a little awkward. And so I'm fortunate that I have a manager as well. And so often these commission requests will go through my manager. And so then you have the advantage of being able to play good cop, bad cop, and your manager can make sure that they hold the bar in terms of getting what the project deserves. And then once the sort of legal matters are taken care of, the contract is signed, then the composer can come in and be all smiles and grins and handshakes. So that's a nice, not that commissioning is usually contentious, but it takes some of the awkwardness out if you have someone that takes care of management for you. That adds then the logistical consideration of your manager is going to get a percentage of your commission fee. That's what's in it for the manager.
Pay your manager.
Yeah, and so if you don't mind negotiating your own rates, then there's much less compelling need to have someone that's doing management for you. But some composers do. I find it quite helpful.
It's very much worth it, taking that burden off your shoulders, plus getting you the ability to maybe negotiate the best deal for yourself as opposed to, I don't want to scare this guy off or whatever.
Right.
One of the reasons I asked the question about do you ask, because sometimes I find if it's early in the process of getting commissions that you might lowball yourself a little bit with some groups.
Right. It's a chicken and egg situation where as an emerging composer, you want to build a reputation, and you can only do that by writing pieces for people and getting them performed. And so you don't want to do it for free. You know, you should be getting money for it. But yes, you lowball. You say, just buy me a pizza and I'll write you a piece. You know, you work out some sort of agreement. And I think that's only natural. And that's the way many careers begin. We collaborate with our friends. We write pieces for very little or no money until you get a little bit of traction. And then once some of your pieces are out there published in the world, getting performed, someone hears a piece of yours played at, we're in Texas, so I'll plug TMEA. If you get a piece played by a saxophone quartet at TMEA, suddenly you're going to start having saxophonists, assuming it's good music, you're going to have saxophonists calling you up and saying, hey, could we commission you for something? And so it's baby steps. It's a very, very long road. And you just sort of navigate it as you come to it.
Yeah, it's great. I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and chat with me today and talk about your business side of things. Certainly, you've created a lot of wonderful pieces that people should check out, and you're constantly getting permission to push out some more. So will be lots of great, exciting music to hear from you. I know I've really enjoyed all the pieces that I've heard from you, so I'm sure other people will, and they can visit you on your website and check out some more of those.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Michael.